Okay, so today we're going deep, really deep into Colombia's peace process.
Yeah.
And you've really outdone yourself with the sources this time. I mean, wow, we've got firsthand accounts from ex-guerrillas, political analysis from some real heavy hitters, and even a look at how indigenous communities are navigating this whole thing.
It's a really powerful collection, you know.
Oh, absolutely
It's not
wonderful.
just history, right? This is a process that's still so raw, still
Yeah,
evolving.
for sure.
The 2016 peace agreement, it was a huge moment.
It was huge.
But as these sources show, peace building, it's so much more than just signatures on paper.
Right, right. So let's rewind a bit for our listeners. Back to that 2016 agreement. After over 50 years, I mean, that's more than half a century of brutal conflict, the government and FARC, that's the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia,
Right.
they finally come together, they hammer out this deal.
It was a global news story. Everybody was
Why,
watching.
sure.
And Juan Manuel Santos, the president at the time, he even won a Nobel Peace Prize for his role in it. And the agreement itself, it was ambitious. I mean, it laid out FARC disarmament, transitional justice, land reform promises, and even political participation for those former FARC members.
So on paper, it looks like, okay, this is it. This is the roadmap to peace.
Yeah.
But as we know, as we're about to get into, things haven't exactly been smooth sailing. So from these sources, what are some of the biggest roadblocks that they highlight?
Well, I think even Marquez's story is a really striking example.
Okay.
This is a guy, a former FARC commander, who was actually at the negotiating table, like right there in the room, helping to craft this peace agreement. And then he turns around, picks up arms again, and forms this dissident group, the Segunda Marquetalia.
Wow, that's quite a turn of events. So why would someone who is so central to the peace process end up rejecting it?
Well, Marquez's reasoning, it exposes, I think, one of the biggest cracks in the whole thing. He argues that the government, they haven't held up their end of the bargain, especially when it comes to land reform and these security guarantees for ex-FARC members.
Which were like key parts of that agreement, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it makes you think, how do you build trust when you have decades of violence and broken promises hanging over everything? That must be so heavy.
It is, and it's easy to get caught up in the political back and forth, but it's crucial to remember this is about real people's lives,
Yeah.
On the ground.
That's right. That's right. And that's what I love about these sources. Some of them are just so personal.
Yeah.
They really bring it to that human level, right?
Definitely, yeah. Like Rubiella's story, she's a former female guerrilla fighter,
Okay.
and her story is featured in this UN Women video. And just imagine this. She joins the guerrillas at 14 years old.
13, that's so young. I mean, it's hard to even grasp what would lead someone that young to join an armed group.
Well, and she talks about it. She witnessed the assassination of community leaders in her village. She was seeking refuge from the violence.
So she was escaping one kind of violence and finding herself in another.
Yeah, it's just a stark reminder of the desperate situations that people were facing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there, right? She's a mother, too.
Yeah, she speaks candidly about that, the struggle of being a mother in the midst of this conflict, leaving her first son behind and then raising her second child while still actively involved in the war.
And now what's amazing is she's actually channeled those experiences into peace building.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
She works with this women's cooperative. They focus on economic opportunities for former combatants. It's really inspiring.
That's incredible. It really is. Then we have Lozada. He's another former FARC commander, but his past is a lot different, right? I mean, we're talking about a top urban commander, a lot of attacks attributed to him. The U.S. even had a $2.5 million bounty on his head.
Yeah, it really shows the spectrum, the different roles and responsibilities people had within FARC.
Right.
Such a different story than Rubiela.
And yet, here he is, living a peaceful life, raising his daughter in a safe environment. I mean, that's a huge transformation.
And he's really outspoken about it. He emphasizes how important political participation is for ex-FARC members.
Okay.
Real political reform. He sees that as the key to Colombia's future.
So even though he's taken a different path, there's still that echo of Marquez's disillusionment, this need for real change in the system.
Yeah, definitely.
Then we have Rommel, another former FARC fighter. His story, it's more of a reality check, right? Because reintegration is still a massive hurdle for so many.
Yeah, Rommel is very disillusioned. He feels like the government hasn't supported ex-combatants the way they promised in the agreement.
Like they're being left behind.
Exactly. He talks about the lack of jobs, inadequate housing, not enough medical services in the demobilization camps.
So peace hasn't really translated into that tangible improvement in his life?
Right. And it makes you wonder how many others are feeling the same way.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of feeds into this larger point, right? That signing a peace agreement is just the first step.
It's just the beginning.
But building a lasting peace, that takes real work. It takes a commitment to fixing those underlying problems that led to the conflict in the first place. If you ignore that, if those needs aren't met, well, that's when things can unravel.
That's how the cycle starts all over again.
Exactly. And that's what's concerning, because a few of the sources point to this resurgence of violence in certain areas, even after the agreement.
It's a harsh reality, I know.
Yeah.
There are still FARC dissidents out there, like the ones Marquez is leading, and then you have the drug cartels, the paramilitary groups, all vying for control in those areas where FARC used to hold power. It's still a very volatile situation.
And it's not just the ex-combatants who are at risk. Even with the agreement in place, indigenous communities are facing a lot of threats.
It's heartbreaking, really. There's this one story, Jorge, he's an indigenous leader featured in one of the documentaries.
Okay.
And he talks about the ongoing violence that his community is experiencing. Illegal mining, coca farming, armed groups operating with impunity in their territory.
So the agreement hasn't brought security to everyone, especially those in these more remote areas.
It exposes the limitations of the government's reach, How do you effectively protect vulnerable populations in areas where the rule of law is already so fragile? It's a huge question.
It really is. And then there's this other disturbing trend that comes up, the targeted killings of social leaders and human rights activists.
Yeah.
Especially in those rural areas. It's scary.
Over 150 former FARC fighters have been killed since the signing of the agreement, and over 400 social leaders.
So the war might be officially over, but the violence, it hasn't stopped.
It's still being used to silence dissent, to maintain control.
Yeah.
It makes you question what peace really means in this context.
It really does. So what's the government doing about this surge in violence? Are they taking any steps?
Well, they've got plans in place, like Horus 2.0, which uses technology and more troop deployments to try to protect community leaders.
Okay.
But will it be enough in the long run? That's the question, right?
Yeah.
And even with these efforts, the root causes of the violence, they're often still being ignored.
And that's what we keep coming back to, isn't it? Peace. It's not just about the guns falling silent.
Yeah.
It's about building a society that's truly just, a society where everyone feels safe, where former enemies can coexist, where you break that cycle of violence.
Exactly. And that brings us to another complicated issue that comes up a lot in these sources, the whole coca conundrum.
Okay, let's talk about that. Because Colombia, as we know, it's the world's leading coca producer, right? That's the raw ingredient for cocaine.
Yeah.
So how does that reality play into the peace process?
Well, it's a bit of a paradox. For a lot of impoverished farmers in those conflict zones, coca, it's been their lifeline.
It's how they survive.
Yeah, it's a source of income when there's literally nothing else.
Yeah.
I remember there's this farmer in one of the documentaries. He called coca the Minister of Education and Health.
Because it allowed him to...
Because it allowed him to buy school supplies for his kids, pay for health care, things like that.
Wow.
It's so deeply ingrained in the economic fabric of certain communities.
Yeah.
And the peace agreement tried to address this, right? With these crop substitution programs, encouraging farmers to grow legal crops instead.
Right. But from what we've seen, those programs haven't been all that successful.
They've had limited success, for sure. I mean, you have to consider there's not enough government support. The demand for coca internationally, it's still so high.
Of course.
And there aren't always viable alternative crops that farmers can even grow.
So it's not enough to just focus on the supply, right? You have to deal with the demand side of things, too.
It has to be a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. And this is where you start to see those deep divisions within Colombian society. Because not everyone is on board with the peace agreement. And these sources, they definitely reflect that.
Yeah, a great example is former President Alvaro Uribe.
Oh, yeah. He's a big critic of the agreement.
He is. He was a mentor to the current president, Ivan Duque.
Okay.
And Uribe, he's very vocal, very influential.
He is.
He represents a significant portion of the Colombian population that, they're skeptical of this whole peace process.
So understanding his perspective is important.
It is.
Because it reflects the views of a large part of the country.
Exactly. Uribe, he sees the agreement as a surrender to FARC, He says it grants impunity to criminals.
Right.
And he thinks it sets a really dangerous precedent for future negotiations with other armed groups.
Yeah.
He's worried about former guerrillas entering politics without being held accountable for their actions.
So it's a question of trust, right? Can you
Yeah.
really forgive and move on without some form of justice? It's a tough question.
It's a question that a lot of people are wrestling with. And that brings us to another key part of the peace agreement. The Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the JEP.
Right, right. We touched on this earlier, but let's dig a bit deeper, because it's one of the most controversial aspects of the entire agreement, isn't it?
It is. The JEP, it's a transitional justice system specifically designed to address the atrocities committed during the conflict.
So it's not your typical court system, right?
No, not at all. It prioritizes truth-telling, reparations for victims, and alternative sentences for those who confess to their crimes.
Alternative sentences, like what does that mean?
Well, instead of traditional prison time, you might see things like community service, restrictions on liberty, things like that.
So it's a very different approach to justice, one that's focused more on healing and reconciliation than punishment.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so controversial. Some people argue it's too lenient, that perpetrators aren't facing real consequences.
But the people who support the JEP, they see it as crucial to moving forward as a nation, right?
They do. They say resorting to traditional punishment, that would just keep that cycle of violence going.
It wouldn't address the root causes.
Exactly. They believe a restorative approach is the only way to truly break free from the past.
It's that fundamental question again. How do you balance the need for justice with the desire for reconciliation? It's such a delicate balance.
It is, and it's a question that continues to divide Colombian society.
Colombia's path to peace, it's definitely not a straight line, is it?
No, it's not. And the sources that we've looked at, they make it very clear. This is a long, hard road ahead.
So what are some of the biggest challenges they see on the horizon?
Well, there are a lot. Making land reform a reality, keeping former combatants and activists safe, addressing those root causes like poverty and inequality, achieving real reconciliation in a country that's so divided.
All while trying to keep this fragile peace process from unraveling.
It's a huge undertaking. And it's not just about the political side of things either. The former FARC member themselves, they're struggling to adapt to this new life outside of the conflict.
They're trying to find their place.
Exactly. There's this one quote from a former combatant that really struck me. "We were family in the jungle. Now it's every man for himself." It's a powerful statement about how difficult that transition can be. You know, going from a life defined by shared struggle to one where you're on your own in a society that's still healing.
It really highlights that peace isn't just about the absence of fighting.
No.
It's about rebuilding those shattered social connections, creating a sense of shared purpose.
Absolutely.
And it looks like some of the people who were once on opposite sides of this conflict, they might actually hold the key to the future.
It's an interesting possibility.
Yeah, because with the recent election of Gustavo Petro, a former guerrilla fighter himself,
Right.
Colombia is entering a whole new chapter.
It's a turning point for sure.
It is. His election, it represents a potential shift in how the country approaches peace. I mean, he has this personal history, this progressive agenda.
Right.
It's created a lot of hope for some, but also some anxiety for others.
Understandably so. It's a lot of uncertainty.
So yeah, the story of Colombia's peace process, it's definitely not over. The decisions being made right now, they'll have a ripple effect, not just within the country, but for millions of people whose lives are directly tied to what happens next.
Absolutely. And as we continue this deep dive, we're going to really unpack those decisions and what they might mean for Colombia's future. So, you know, Petro, he's got this really interesting concept, total peace, he calls it.
Total peace.
Yeah. And it goes beyond that FARC agreement, right?
Okay.
He wants to bring in all these other armed groups that are still active in Colombia.
That's incredibly ambitious. Is that even realistic? Can he actually pull that off?
It's a huge challenge. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of people behind him, people who really believe in this vision. They think, you know, because Petro was a guerrilla fighter himself.
Right.
He's the only one who can actually understand the complexities of this conflict, like really get it.
Yeah.
But then you've got the skeptics too, you know.
Oh, I'm sure.
They're worried that negotiating with all these different groups, it could actually weaken the government. Like they might have to make too many concessions just to get everyone to the table.
So it's a balancing act, right?
Yeah, big time.
He needs dialogue, he needs compromise, but he can't compromise the integrity of the peace process or the state itself.
Exactly. It's a very delicate situation.
It is. And I mean, even just looking at the sources we have, they give us a glimpse into how hard it is to engage with these groups.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, take the Segunda Marquetalia, for example, that FARC dissident faction led by Ivan Marquez.
Right, the ones who broke away.
They're a direct challenge to the existing peace agreement, right?
They are.
And yet, it seems like Petro is actually willing to talk to them.
He is. There have been some recent talks actually initiated in Venezuela.
Venezuela. Okay, so now we're bringing in another country. This just keeps getting more complicated.
It does, yeah. And Venezuela's involvement, it raises some eyebrows, you know?
Yeah, of course.
Some people are concerned about them meddling in Colombia's internal affairs, or, how regional power dynamics could end up influencing the peace process.
So it's not just about Colombia anymore. It's
bigger than that.
Yeah, it's regional, it's international.
It is.
And then on top of all of that, you've got these smaller armed groups operating all over the country.
Oh, yeah. Those are a whole other challenge.
They're different from FARC in a lot of ways, aren't they?
They are, yeah. Their motivations tend to be more economic, It's less about ideology and more about survival.
Yeah.
Like straight up economic necessity.
They need to make money. They need to control resources.
Yeah, exactly. And these groups, they're the ones that are really impacting people like Jorge.
The indigenous leader we talked about earlier.
Right. Him and his community, they're caught in the middle of all this, between the armed groups, the military, the government. It shows that to achieve total peace, you can't just focus on the big players.
Right.
You have to consider everyone, especially the people who are the most vulnerable.
Yeah, you have to address the root causes, those systemic issues that are driving the conflict.
Exactly. Things like land ownership, economic inequality, the lack of opportunities for marginalized communities.
Right, right. And land reform, that was one of the key sticking points in the original peace agreement, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
And it's something that Uribe and the other critics of the agreement, they keep bringing up.
Okay.
They argue that redistributing land to peasant farmers and ex-guerrillas, it's going to hurt the economy.
It'll discourage investment, they say.
Right. It's a very specific economic perspective.
And I guess it comes down to these fundamental disagreements about what a fair distribution of land would even look like.
Yeah, totally. These are deep-seated beliefs about ownership, about power, about historical legacy.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way back to how this conflict started in the first place.
Right.
Some experts, they believe that Colombia's land ownership structure, the fact that so much land is concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families, that's one of the biggest drivers of the inequality and the unrest that fueled the war.
It's that legacy of colonialism.
Exactly.
Centuries of exploitation, land grabbing, all of that, it created these imbalances that are still playing out today.
It's not just about the present. It's about addressing those historical injustices.
And in all of this, we have to consider the indigenous communities.
Oh, absolutely.
They're the ones who've been hit the hardest by all of this. The land dispossession, the violence.
Their ancestral territories have been taken over by armed groups, by mining companies, by agribusinesses.
And often with the government's blessing.
Yeah, sometimes even with their active support. It's a complicated situation.
So it's not enough to just focus on the political side of the peace process, right?
Right.
You have to deal with the economic and social factors, too, the things that are perpetuating this cycle of inequality.
It has to be a holistic approach.
Multifaceted.
Yeah, you can't just address one piece of the puzzle and expect everything to fall into place.
I mean, Petro, he's really got his work cut out for him.
He does.
He's trying to deliver on this promise of total peace, but he's also dealing with this incredibly complex political landscape.
Right.
He's trying to address all these historical grievances. It's a lot.
It's a lot to juggle, for sure.
And then, of course, there's the drug trade.
Yeah, that's the big one, the issue that just never seems to go away.
It's like the elephant in the room.
It is. The drug trade, it touches every aspect of this peace process,
It does, yeah.
It funds the armed groups. It corrupts officials. It fuels the violence in the cities and the countryside. It's a mess.
The peace agreement, I know it had some provisions for addressing the coca trade, didn't it?
It did, yeah. There were plans for crop substitution programs, rural development initiatives, even some targeted efforts to disrupt the trafficking networks themselves.
Okay.
But the problem is, like we saw with that farmer who called coca his Minister of Education and Health, you can't just eradicate the coca without offering people a real alternative.
Right, something sustainable, something that can actually support them.
Exactly. If you just try to wipe it out without addressing the root causes,
it's going to backfire.
It will, absolutely.
So you need that balance, right? Cracking down on the illegal trade, but also giving people a real chance to make a living without having to rely on coca.
Yeah, it's about breaking that cycle.
And I guess we can't forget about the demand side of things either, can we? the fact that there's this huge market for cocaine internationally.
That's a big part of it, yeah. A lot of that demand is coming from the U.S., from Europe, and that plays a huge role in keeping the whole thing going.
So it's not just a Colombian problem, it's a global one.
It is. And it's going to take a global solution to really address it.
It's going to take international cooperation.
Yeah, definitely. You need everyone on board, tackling both the supply and the demand if you really want to make a dent in the drug trade.
So Colombia's pursuit of peace, it's tied to all these global forces, right?
Yeah.
The economy, these criminal networks, it's all connected.
It is. And the success of the peace process, it doesn't just depend on what happens within Colombia.
Yep.
It depends on how much support they get from the international community, how much everyone is willing to work together.
So the stakes are high.
Yeah, very high. I mean, the decisions that are being made right now, they're going to have a ripple effect, not just for Colombia's future, but for millions of people who are caught in the crossfire of this conflict.
That's what makes this deep dive so important, I think.
It is.
It's not just about understanding what happened in the past. It's about understanding this complex process of peace building.
Right.
Trying to figure out how to make peace a reality in the face of all these challenges.
It's an ongoing story.
It is.
And we're still in the middle of it.
You know, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, the challenges, the setbacks, the violence.
That's a lot.
But even with all that, these sources, they show this real sense of hope, this resilience.
That's the thing about Colombia, you know.
Yeah.
They've been through so much, but there's this spirit, this refusal to give up. It's incredible.
It is. It is. And we see it in the individuals. Like, you know, we talked about Rubiela and Lozada.
Yeah.
Former combatants who are dedicating their lives to building peace, to helping their communities heal.
Yeah. And it's not just them.
It goes way beyond that, right?
Way beyond. Think about the student protests, the journalists like Janet Bedoya, the human rights defenders like Soledad Amaya.
Right, right.
They're all fighting for a better future. They're not backing down.
They're putting themselves on the line.
Exactly. And art and culture are playing a huge role in all of this, too.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, one of the sources, it mentioned this book that's trying to change the way people think about Colombia.
Okay.
Like moving beyond the conflict narrative, focusing on the country's rich cultural heritage, the beauty, the vibrancy.
So it's about reclaiming their own stories.
It is. Through art, music, literature, film, Colombians are imagining new possibilities.
Yeah.
They're showing the world that there's more to their country than just violence and conflict.
It's about shifting perspectives, right? Seeing beyond those simple labels, victim, perpetrator, and recognizing that shared humanity.
That's what it all comes down to in the end, I think.
It does.
Recognizing our shared humanity, the potential for healing.
And that's where the whole idea of transitional justice comes in, that special jurisdiction for peace.
Yeah, the JEP.
We talked about how controversial it is, but these sources, they also highlight the potential, you know?
Yeah, the potential for real restorative justice, truth-telling reconciliation.
It's not about revenge, it's about acknowledging the past and then figuring out how to build something different.
It's a really unique approach. The JEP, it acknowledges that just punishing people for the crimes they committed, it's not always enough.
It doesn't heal the wounds, right?
No, it doesn't. It's about giving victims a voice, a chance to share their stories.
To be heard.
And it gives perpetrators a chance to actually take responsibility for their actions.
To really understand the impact of what they did.
Yeah, it's about understanding, not just punishing.
And by creating that space for truth and reconciliation,
Right.
The JEP is trying to break that cycle of violence.
Yeah.
Trying to create a more just and equitable society.
It's ambitious.
It is.
But I think it comes from a place of deep empathy, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
A real understanding of the human cost of this conflict.
But we can't pretend it's easy, right?
Oh, no, definitely not.
It takes incredible courage to face those painful truths, to challenge those long-held beliefs about justice and accountability.
And leadership plays a huge role in that, I think.
Okay.
Petro, with his commitment to total peace, his willingness to talk to former enemies, even the ones who've taken up arms again, it's a huge test for him.
Yeah, it is. He's walking a tightrope, trying to balance those demands for justice with the need for reconciliation.
And he's up against some really powerful interests, people who benefit from the conflict continuing.
So the pressure is on.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But at the end of the day, the success of the peace process, it really hinges on the Colombian people themselves.
It does.
Their willingness to forgive, to have those tough conversations, to demand change, that's what's going to determine whether lasting peace is possible.
It's like a collective effort.
It has to be.
Yeah, shared journey.
And it's a daunting journey. But even with all the tough realities they present, these sources,
Right.
they give me a sense of cautious optimism. I don't know about you.
I feel it too.
Like, there's this flicker of hope that just won't be extinguished.
It's the human spirit, you know? That's what keeps us going.
It does. It does. So Colombia's peace process, it's still evolving. It's a testament to our capacity for both immense darkness and incredible resilience, right?
It is.
It's a story of loss, of pain, but it's also a story of hope.
Yeah.
And this relentless pursuit of a better future.
It is. It's something we can all learn from, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, that's maybe the question we should all be asking ourselves.
Okay.
What can we learn from Colombia's experience?
Right.
How can we, each of us, support those who are working so hard to build a more just and peaceful world? Not just in Colombia, but everywhere.
Those are the big questions.
They are.
And by engaging with these different perspectives, by really trying to understand the complexities of conflict and peace building, maybe, just maybe, we can each play a role in creating a world where violence isn't the answer.
Where dialogue, understanding, compassion, those are the tools we use to build a better future.
A future filled with hope, with possibility.
That's something worth striving for.
Absolutely, I think so.